Hi, my name is Diana Mara Henry, and I'm going to show some photographs from my career in photography, which started in 1967, and we'll probably see some images from then. We could start with a couple of images that I have of some people who were photography mentors or influences in some way. And this is Julian Wasser at the Democrat Convention in Miami Beach in 1972 with his companion at the time. You can see the label, Vice Den. This is part of a project I did called the Libel Project, in which I libeled people in my photographs with libel words from around 1900. So they're very old-fashioned. It was meant to be a lighthearted way to challenge people as to why they accept the truth of captions and words with photographs. So these are removable labels. This is another photograph of a mentor in photography, Julian Levy, and he is here photographing a couple of friends in Venice Beach, California. We were looking at sand painting on the sand in Venice Beach. Seemed rather humorous. The libel word that I used with that was sneak. Here are a couple of photographs of James Brown at Rikers Island. I was the only photographer at that event. James Brown put on a full stage show with many changes of costume, totally professional, for the prisoners at the Rikers Island Manhattan House of Detention in New York City, 1973. Very dynamic performance and extremely exciting for me to be on stage with James Brown. I was in the wings, but it was the event of a lifetime. This is a photograph from 1968. I was working on the film If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium, a David Wolper production, one of the great B movies of all time. A cafe in Luxembourg on a rainy day when we couldn't film, so we all piled into a local cafe to while away the time. Some of these photographs I consider self-portraits. I mean, in a way they all are, but some more than others. Here's the Renaissance Fair in Orinda, California in 1971. I think it was one of the earliest Renaissance fairs. This is also from 1971, a demonstration against the US invasion in Cambodia, on Park Avenue in New York City. I don't know if you can see the sign on the back of that person's head, but it's a photograph of the My Lai massacre ditch. And the wording says, and babies, and babies. So that's the title of the photograph. These are all small snippets of much larger bodies of work. So I probably took at least 2 rolls of film. That's maybe 70 images that day. And some of them are on my website, my old website, dianamarahenry.com. Soon, hopefully, to be in a new incarnation. This is from a series of photographs I took at Fashion Week at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, 1973. Rosemary Bishop, former model, fashion editor at the time of that photograph. She died of lung cancer. So this is from a series of images I took at Port Authority bus terminal in New York City in 1973, a photojournalism workshop. It didn't take a lot of photography courses. Never got an MFA, which were very rare in the early 70s. But in any case, I'm very grateful I did not ever do an MFA, because I think when you study, you tend to want to imitate or emulate your teacher's work and style and vision, and I never had to do that. But this workshop was maybe 5 people, taught by Lee Romero, who was a great New York Times photographer. And it was called a photojournalism workshop, and we just picked something to photograph and came back and showed him our work. And then eventually we had a group exhibit for our class at Hanratty's, which was a pub or a bar, Irish bar on the Upper West Side. Here's a photograph taken at the World Trade Center before it came down. This was occurring at the Avant-Garde Art Festival there. I think it was the 13th Avant-Garde Art Festival, organized by Charlotte Moorman. And there are pages on my website for these. Probably the best place to go if you go to dianamarahenry.com is from the home page to go to the Spotlight page. And then from the Spotlight page to go to the, there's a click-through at the top of the page. You have to click on the link to get to the main Spotlight page, which is called Prevent Theft of Labor, for a reason I explain on the Spotlight page. One of my assignments as a freelance photographer was often to photograph a party. I was a party photographer, which was great. I wasn't a paparazzi because I was invited to these events. This was before one of the events that I was hired to photograph at the Metropolitan Museum. And I showed this photograph to Harold Holzer, who was someone I met through Bella Abzug's campaign, her press secretary. And he looked at this photograph and he said, "Oh, that statue doesn't exist anymore." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it fell over, so it's in 1,000 pieces." So sometimes something's historic and you don't even know what you're photographing is going to disappear, even if it's in the Metropolitan Museum. So here's an early print. This is probably from 1967, the first year that I started photography at the Harvard Crimson, which was my college newspaper, which is, I say Harvard was my trade school because that's eventually what kept me in school after the academic bullshit wore off. So this again is from If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium. This is Suzanne Plachette on a boat on the Rhine being prepared by her hairdresser for the shoot. That was 1968. I believe this is 1973 at Rizzoli Bookstore, Fashions by Karl Lagerfeld, for a benefit of avant-garde fashion to support Fountain House, which was a drug rehab in New York. And some of these prints I have more than one, although seldom more than two. This is also an early photograph taken in Rome at the Piazza Navona. There was a wedding at the church, and this was one of the guests, I believe, who spilled out into the front of the church and onto the square, so I was able to photograph her. These prints were made by me. They're sea prints. They were made at Germain School of Photography in Manhattan. That was one of the courses I took. It was a technical course for people who were working in color labs. And I took the subway from, if you know Manhattan, all the way from 96th Street down to the Wall Street area to go to this it was a trade school. And it was about a 5-month course, 5 hours a night with Professor Hollingsworth. That was our teacher. Was a great teacher, and he really taught us taught me a lot about color correction. So, and those were the days when photographs were made on film, and then they were, the film was processed, and then the print was made on paper, the print was processed, all in chemicals that were very toxic. And at the time, the color printing in a professional setting, like the trade school taught us, The printing was done in vats, large vats in a tiled room. And the prints were clipped onto hangers and then pulled out of the one chemical bath and moved into the next one. And it was important to agitate the prints. So Professor Hollingsworth would say, when we came out of the print room, he said, if I don't see chemicals all over the walls, I'll know that you haven't agitated enough to get an even surface. So I guess that was before the days of OSHA and the EPA. This was for a project called the New York Answer to Mugging. And Bill Nelson organized this project and had me photograph the people he was going to interview, one of whom was Bill Kunstler. That was very interesting. This was a car mechanic. Don't know his name. Here is a photograph made outside the Empire Cat Club show at the Javits Convention Center in New York City, Manhattan. And this was a sideshow. The man was not in the main exhibition area, but he was having his cat perform on the escalator, as you can see. The perfect image of motherhood, I'd say, with the warning finger to keep her still. Another framing of it. Taken at the Pioneer Inn in Lahaina, Maui, 1971. That place is now fried. This one, I have a couple of prints. I did a print with a different cropping for this one. Usually I tried to not crop. The discipline that we were brought up with was to include everything in the frame of the image and nothing else. So it was a kind of discipline. Because the images were very small, they were 35 millimeter, the cameras I was working with mostly. So if you couldn't get it into something this size, you missed out. And if you had to crop something this size and make it even smaller, you'd miss the quality of the image. This is a demonstration for the ERA, March for the ERA in New York City, 1976. The sign here reads, "A woman's place is in the White House." Here are some more images from that 1971 trip to Hawaii. This may have been on Oahu, on the North Shore. So back to Lahaina on Maui. A great big banyan tree, perhaps no longer there. Playing Tarzan in the tree. Here's another one. Same little boy. So here's a trip to North Carolina, 1976, or thereabouts. I call this the bull on wheels. It's a Cibachrome print. So Cibachrome was a different process. It was printing directly from a slide. You didn't need to go through a negative. So you could print directly from the slide to make the print. And it was extremely toxic material. I taught Cibachrome for a semester at the International Center for Photography in New York with no ventilation in the basement darkroom. So, still here to tell this story. But Cibachrome was eventually removed from the market because it was so poisonous. The advantage of Cibachrome was that the prints, unlike other color prints, C prints or color dyes in general, the Cibachrome was extremely durable. So you could hang this in a window in bright sunlight for years and it would not degrade. Not that I would do that, but it's much more durable. There's another Cibachrome that I printed in the darkroom at the International Center for Photography, where I was teaching the course at the time. This is Good Boy Eats Tulips. Well, here's another medium that's not so commonly used these days. This is a color photocopy made on a Xerox machine. And it's my hands and commando sweater. My title for it is I Am My Own Guardian Angel. This was at a dinner, Amnesty International dinner, honoring Sean McBride, who's in the photograph. He was offered a rose by Joan Baez, and I guess he was overcome with emotion. So Sean McBride was one of the founders of Amnesty International and later became the commissioner for Namibia. This is from 1968, working at with If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium, a day off at Battersea Park in London. I took up with some little girls took up with me actually, started following me around, and so there's a whole series of them. Actually, I have 2 prints of this. It's challenging to print because of the light background in the pool. No Photoshop at the time. Had to do it all by hand. This is from a series of photographs I made visiting and staying near the National Stud Farm of France in Pompadour. France actually has 24 national stud farms, or did at the time. This was the mid-60s. So the French government interest in raising horses, I guess, was expressed by their running these national stud farms, in which they produce not only race horses and bred race horses, but also horses for food and other types of animals, but mostly they're known for their horse breeding. This was in a specimen jar, a fetus. I guess they were keeping it for scientific or research purposes. So on a trip to Crete, a southern island of Greece, in 1973. I think this was near the Valley of the Windmills. Woman winnowing grain. The reason these are all not in a series is that they're images that I've put together as a selection, but not as a series. So these images are some of my favorites, but taken at different times and chosen to be put online at different times. So what it makes up in variety, hopefully will make up for the changes of subject matter. This is Jennifer, my cousin's daughter, at her house in San Rafael, California, around 1985. I was the official photographer for the first National Women's Conference in Houston, 1977. And this is a photograph Gloria Steinem really likes. That's her on the monitor, TV monitor from the back of the hall. And she's also speaking on stage. And at the time, everyone wanted to emulate Gloria Steinem's style. So you can see the reporter who's watching her has basically the same hairstyle and the same aviator glasses. It's a tribute to Gloria in many different ways. She likes that image. She chose it for a book that I did, which included her essay. This again was taken at the time of If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium. This was during a weekend outing of the lower staff on the film. So, the grips and the assistant grips and the driver and me, who was the publicity secretary, assistant. So we went to Clacton-on-Sea, south of London on the Channel, a seacoast resort for a Sunday outing. There's a photograph equally or even earlier from 1967, I believe. I have it marked as being Paris. I have no recollection of anything that day. Well, this one's mounted on black board. You can kind of tell at what time I printed and mounted them, because originally I was mounting on black board, but switched to white eventually because that was more artistic, or conventionally artistic, let's say. This again is a color photocopy. It's from a slide or a negative. I don't remember having any other version of this image except this. I think it was a color negative. It was taken in Rome in 1967. So the sign says morte non ha sesso, which means death has no gender. This is from visiting my schoolmates' home in the Limousin in central France, what they call la France profonde, which means way back in time and place, remote. And this is her on her hearth, her husband's boot, and the cat Neige, who is called Snow in French. This is at the Prince Albert pub in London. Again, during the filming of If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium. Also, probably on a Sunday when I was walking around on my own. There's something very touching to me about the way people relate to me in these photographs. The smile. I think being photographed made them feel happy. And people have told me it did enhance their consciousness of themselves. If they didn't want to be photographed, I didn't photograph them. So, but there was a lot of gift going on between us, even people I didn't know. This is at the stud farm in France, again at Pompadour. This is what they call an étalon marqueur. He's a gelding. He's wearing a harness with wax on his chest so that, let's see, not to be too explicit, but if it takes an interest in a female, then the breeders will see the mark on her back and they'll know that she can be bred by someone who's a stallion, not a gelding. This is another photograph from Hawaii. Two guys getting ready to jump in their truck with their surfboards, head out to catch the waves. This photograph was originally from a color negative. I printed it in black and white. Looks great in both. It's siesta time on the Italian Riviera in the days when no one went swimming after lunch because it was dangerous and you would drown if you went into the water within an hour or two of having lunch or any meal. So that only enhanced the siesta. This is the cover of my book, A Life in Photography. And again, it's in central France, a wild goose chase. Is that why I put it on the cover of my book, A Life in Photography? This is at Pompadour during a demonstration or competition of dressage. This is, I believe, a sea print, although it has a black border, and all of these were from slides. I don't think this is a Cibachrome. This is very early also, 1967, in Paris, in Montmartre, a conversation among neighbors. So that was about 20 years, a little more than 22, 23 years after the end of the war. And now that I look at it with a little more understanding of history, I wonder what those people were doing during the war. Were they in the resistance? Were they collaborators? What's on their mind? I'll show you a lighter version of this. This is 1971, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, Memorial Day weekend, where they retraced the march through Lexington and Concord, stayed over on the Green. I photographed several days of the event, which ended up in Boston Common. So this photograph is on Boston Common. And the man in the wheelchair is not Ron Kovic, although I do know who some of the people are behind the man in the wheelchair. This is really early, probably when I was still trying out part of the competition to be a photographer for the Harvard Crimson. So this is Central Park, two sets of brothers, I think. Again, I love the way, they've arranged themselves, especially the two boys in the front. There's a purposefulness about it and a consciousness. that moment when I made this photograph of them was something in their lives too. This is at the Biblical Garden of St. John the Divine. In Manhattan, I was studying Tai Chi with Da Lu, a Tai Chi master, former police chief of Shanghai, who ended up teaching in Manhattan for many years. Marvelous teacher. You can still find his books, I think. That's not Da Lu in the picture. That's a friend who was doing the course with me. So I don't know if you can see it, but this was taken in 1972 from the roof of the St. George Hotel in Brooklyn Heights, looking over to the World Trade Center. That was the year the World Trade Center was completed. And I was a staff photographer for Brooklyn Today, which was a weekly newspaper that the publisher, James Smith, who hired me, hoped to make into a daily, Brooklyn being such a really major city in its own right, even though it's a borough of New York City. James Smith never was able to make it into a daily. So I don't know if it lasted much longer than about 6 months. But he had sent me to photograph the editor had sent me to photograph the St. George Hotel, which was in a ruined, decayed state. And I went up onto the roof. I documented the decay. And I went up onto the roof. And now when I look at the photograph, which you can see here, there's something ominous about this photograph. I mean, it was ominous at the time, and I meant to include this. I don't know if you can see the black palm print, which is like a warning or a curse or something. So this was 72, so it was 30 years before the World Trade Center was taken down, but it's an interesting, I call it premonition. In any case, I did mean to include that palm print. This is also from 1967, a storefront in Manhattan, also mounted on blackboard. You can see it does show up better with a black background. I call it male image. This also from 1972, from working for Brooklyn Today. This was a subway stop on Atlantic Avenue. And I understand that this building, which was so iconic, was taken down, the subway station. But apparently they kept the Atlantic Avenue architectural detail from the roof in the new subway station. I haven't seen it. But of course, I'm pretty sure they didn't include thick shakes in the preservation effort, which to me is, and the ice cream cone is the whole point. I believe this was taken somewhere around Houston Street or Little Italy in Manhattan. I have no recollection of the year, what I was doing there, why I was there. It's kind of a generic photograph for me. It doesn't seem particularly like a Diana Mara Henry photograph. On the other hand, I really love it. And my mentor, Julian Levy, used to say, your best photographs are the photographs that only you could have taken. Only you. No one else would have seen that. So that's a very, very high standard. He had another standard, which was, you should always ask your photograph, so what? And if you can't rise to the defense of your image when you challenge it that way, then don't bother. That's not one of your better images. Julian taught me a lot. But sometimes it doesn't apply. This is, I believe, 1971 in Manhattan, which I also printed larger. Here's another image from Port Authority Bus Terminal, 1973. Sort of a clash of cultures there at the Port Authority, which was kind of a shopping mall. So you saw the man washing the window at Fannie Farmer, famous. This is inside the Fannie Farmer store, woman at work. There was also a bowling alley at Port Authority. I don't know if you can see it. There is a man there in the window, standing in front of the window. paying his bill. Someone I worked for asked me to photograph, I think it was his boyfriend, but supposedly trying out for a modeling career. We went all over New York, and then we ended up at my apartment for a cup of tea or something. This is Fashion Week at the Plaza. You saw a couple of images earlier. I call this the gossips. Here's another one at Port Authority. This reminds me of a film noir. Mystery at the Port Authority. Here's another photographer, Roland Sherman, that I photographed. He had been sent on assignment to photograph. If it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium. So this was taken in Rome. I guess he was having a break from his glamorous assignment. And a film was done about him called Eye on the 60s, the iconic photographs of Roland Sherman. So I'm still waiting for someone to do Eye on the 70s. The iconic photographs of yours truly. I did, my collection is at UMass Amherst, a special collection at the Du Bois Library. And I recommended and introduced Roland to them, so they have his collection of photographs now as well. Nice to help others out when you can. I have recommended and introduced other artists and photographers to that collection. Maybe responsible for another 3 or 4 collections there, besides mine. This is, you probably recognize, La France Profonde with the wooden clogs. A nice farmer with his tool, leaning on his tool. Salvador Dali and Ultraviolet at a party that I photographed at the Hayden Planetarium. I was on assignment. I think it was 1975. Her name was Isabelle Dufresne. I think she's notorious for having shot Andy Warhol. Anyway, she wrote to me and asked me for this photograph of her and Salvador Dali. This is in Crete, 1973. I rented a car in Heraklion, and they provided me with a map, road map. So, but the only thing was the roads that were on the map didn't seem to be able to be found when driving. So I would, whenever I came to a crossroads, I would just stop the car, turn it off, and wait for someone to come along, which eventually this beautiful woman did. Again, she's smiling. I don't know if you can see it, but you know, it was a great moment for both of us. And eventually I'd, show on the map where I wanted to go, and they'd tell me right or left. When I went back to the car rental place a couple of days later and asked them about the map, I said, this map, you see these roads here, they don't seem to exist. And they said, well, no, they haven't been built yet. But since we, we're printing the maps anyway, we just thought we'd include the roads that are planned. So I had a really wonderful adventure that night because I did not get where I thought I would get to that would have a hotel on the beach. So I stayed with some folks that I met in a cafe. Long story anyway. It was great that the map didn't have the up-to-date roads on it yet. So I was the official photographer for the first National Women's Conference, Houston, 1977. And this photograph of Coretta Scott King was made there. She was applauding Barbara Jordan's keynote address. Photograph from Pompadour, the town, and a carriage. So one of the equine arts that they cultivate at the French National Stud Farm is carriage driving and so on. So again, this is 1976. I don't know what the National Stud Farms are up to now. But at that time, you could see the carriages, at the stables and the stable grounds of the stud farm, but also going through town on practice runs. Another photograph made at the Renaissance Fair in Orinda, California in 1971. It's a belly dancer performing with the guys in the background looking every which way but at her. But she's looking at us with her castanets in front of her face. This is 1972, the first time I saw Bella. press conference at the Battery. This led to a decade-long association with her as her campaign photographer, and then as official photographer for the first National Women's Conference, for which she was the chair. It was a dramatic moment for me. I squirreled my way through the legs of the male TV camera people. That was at the time when women were not doing all that much yet in television. And so all the reporters around her, of course, are male. So I didn't want to, get in their way, so I kind of squeezed through their legs and knelt at Bella's feet. So you can see in the photograph that it was a spectacular moment, and I was so thrilled. I actually was changing lenses on my camera a minute before that probably, and dropped my camera lens because I was so excited about what I was seeing. But later I've thought about it, and I've looked at her radiant smile again, and I've thought about all the things we did together to, what I did to record her career and her great work. And I think maybe it was a good moment for her too. In any case, this photograph was made, they cut out the Chinese lettering and made the photograph of her into a campaign poster, which was plastered all over the West Side in very big format, something like 4 by 6 feet, something like that. And it was also used in other campaign materials of hers. And that was the first time that shot I provided to them for free, but after that she always hired me for a perfectly professional day rate. She didn't believe in abusing women professionals, and she encouraged young professionals around her to do more than we ever thought we could. She was a really great mentor and inspiration, even though her method was often a kick in the pants. This was an image taken at a church fair in southern France, probably around 1983. The little girl in the front is holding an apple. It was like late summer, August maybe, and I don't know what the religious occasion was, but she was bringing the apple as an offering for the altar. And it's studded with 5-franc coins, which at the time were pretty valuable. They were like $1 coins. This, with all due respect to the great artist there on the pole, is a kind of self-portrait also. It's one of those images that I think of as, well, it, has some meaning for me. So what, life being a balancing act and all that, it's not rocket science, but it's, I did get in touch with Ringling Brothers Museum, the Ringling Museum, and I think it's Florida. And they thought they could identify the troupe that this aerialist was part of, an Eastern European trapeze and aerialist troupe, but they didn't know the name of the artist. But I did send them this photograph and another one I took of one of their elephants in performance also. It's a photograph taken from my last year at college for the Harvard Crimson. This was at the Lowell House Common Room. It was a student-faculty advisory committee debating college and the university's investments in South Africa. And the light streaming through the windows is unique, at least as part of that time. The effect couldn't be achieved today with a simple photography, and it's because of the very heavy cigarette smoke in the room. A lot of people were smoking. So Nathan Pusey, the president of Harvard, is on the left, and on the right, on the couches are in the foreground. The first one is Marty Peretz, who started the New Republic, and then Stanley Hoffman, who is professor of French language or culture and civilization, and then Erik Erikson, the great psychologist, stages of life person, and I don't know the student talking. Rogers Albritton, the professor, is also in the photograph. I think this photograph was, I think, my first published photograph in the real world. It was used in a book called Life, Love, Joy, which was not about the Harvard experience. Torso. Photograph made at a friend's home in Columbia, South Carolina, when I was visiting with them for the wedding. Another one of lambing season in central France, in the Limousin. These are a couple of images from the Miracle, this is at the Miracle Grotto at Lourdes, going into southern France toward the Pyrenees, around Christmas, after Christmas time. It's my friend Tanya in her garden in Meuzac, near Pompadour. She was a classmate at the Lycée Français in New York, where we studied together from 6th grade through, I left after 11th grade. I think she went through to after 12th grade. She was a jockey and a trainer. So that's who I visited in the stud farm in Pompadour with, and then went to the racetracks with her in southern France. Never saw her race, but she did do some flat racing. This is the castle at Pompadour. Most of the castle was burnt down and destroyed during the French Revolution, but the servants' quarters is the wing that's left. Here's another Cibachrome print that I made from one of the little towns around there, around the Corrèze. This is at the castle of Ségur, Ségur-le-Château, a door overgrown with vines in the castle. Tanya's teddy bear, and Tanya, also known as Georgette, but she took the name Tanya later, or called herself George. I call this mussel trees from the farmland around there. Here's a photograph from Paris, I think around 1973, facing a cab driver, his assistant in the passenger seat, and I think we're approaching the Invalides building there in the distance. This is a later photograph taken in Paris on the périphérique, the highway that runs around the inner city. I think this was taken around the year 2000. Here's Tanya's neighbor in the farm next door. On Christmas morning, we went over to wish them a happy Christmas, and there was a big pot of chestnuts on the table in the kitchen. Here's another view of what remains of the castle of Pompadour. To the right of that fence before the castle is the racetrack. Quite a scenic racetrack there. So here's another photograph from the south of France, around 1983. It's a portrait. So I call this one Backward Glance. It was a photograph of my husband at the time. We had just decided to divorce. And I said to him, gee, it's too bad I never did those nude photographs of you that we always talked about doing. And he said, well, why don't we go do them now? So we went down to Hatton Canyon, which he was responsible for saving. His activism saved this beautiful canyon near Carmel, California from destruction. The state was planning an 8-lane highway through Hatton Canyon. For some ridiculous reason, it would only have been about a 2-mile stretch between Monterey and just south of Carmel Valley Road. So they were going to run 8 lanes through this canyon, and he organized the opposition to that. So, and then I did another one. He brought the accessories, the gloves. So that concludes what I have to show of this collection. And I hope you enjoyed the variety.